have access to the market. Did that explain it, Chuck?
Yeah.
Doc, could I interject here? I was in the hog industry in the early 80s, and we ran into exactly what Bill's telling everybody about. We had sows, we were raising pigs, we'd bring in 300 to 500 feeder pigs to the auction. It became a time when the auction said to me, Mike, we can't sell these hogs anymore. We don't have enough buyers here. You're gonna have to get aligned with somebody. That's when I quit the hog industry and shifted more focus into the cattle industry, because I wasn't gonna be a hog house janitor. But that happened in the 1980s, early 80s, when we were raising hogs. We got booted out basically because there was no competition to buy the hogs. And I told a senator from Kansas, Pat Roberts, he said during the 2008 Farm Bill, earlier even, that there was no problem with the marketing arrangements today, that back then. And I told him a simple scenario. I said, I'll tell you what, you buy 500 feeder pigs, I'll feed them out here for you, and we're going to take them to the auction and see what you get for them. He never did buy the feeder pigs.
I wonder why.
Yeah, there's no market.
So do we have a natural limit built in that, let me explain what I'm asking. So with the life cycle of a cow calf situation, does that give us a limit to where the same exact thing can't happen, and kind of it kind of keeps us in this intermediate area to work this out and keep this battle up until we make some progress? Or can it slide at some point to where these contractual agreements go back further in a cow calf life cycle?
So the answer is it can get much, much worse. And all we have to do is look at, we've got 5 cattle procurement regions in the United States that USDA recognizes. The one in the South, Texas, Oklahoma, New Mexico, has the lowest percentage of cattle sold in the price discovery market. They're down to about 8% for the third quarter of this year. And so there, it's a almost exclusive reliance upon these formula contracts. And of course, you've got a lot of the Mexican cattle end up down in those large feedlots, and you have the largest feedlots closely aligned with the packers. So if, let's say you wanted to start up a farmer feeding operation with a 1,000, 2,000 capacity feedlot, you don't want to be in Texas, because unless you have a contract with the packers, there's no competition left in that cash market. And so that's the extreme within the 5 regions. And then you get up to the Iowa, Minnesota area, where the cash market volume is somewhere around 50%. And that's because you still have more farmer feeders up there that recognize the importance of the market, and they've refrained from entering into these formula contracts, knowing that ultimately it was going to wipe them out, just as it did all of the hogs in Iowa. Used to be a huge hog producing state, still is, but now you've got very few participants producing a lot more hogs. And so the answer to your question is we could continue if we don't do anything. We know the trajectory. The trajectory for the past many years has been downward in terms of the number of feedlots in the United States, downwards in terms of the returns to you as a cow-calf producer, downwards in terms of the returns even to cattle feeding. So we've got trajectories that are all headed steeply downward. And if we don't change anything, we're going to continue to drive this industry steeply downward. We're going to lose more participants. We're going to lose more cattle out of our mother cow herd, and a greater dependence on the imports. We've seen the volume of imports that are now contribute to the available supply of the beef in the United States. A little over a generation ago, about 10% of the available beef in this country was derived from imported beef or beef from imported cattle. Today, that number is up around over 20%, somewhere's around 20%. So we've doubled our reliance on imports. And, we've done that in an industry where we do not produce enough beef in America to satisfy Americans' appetite for beef. So we have always relied somewhat on imports, but the reliance is growing. And the other answer to your question is, we used to have what was called the cattle cycle. That wasn't just based on drought like we're seeing now. You know, our supply volume is increasing and decreasing based on drought. It used to be based on the competitive forces in the marketplace. When market prices for cattle began to decline, we would begin a liquidation phase of the industry, and it lasted 3 to 4 years. And then as the supply and demand hit an equilibrium and producers would expect future profits, they began to implement that long biological cycle and began to rebuild the herd. So the building phase used to last about 6 or 7 years, and then you'd have a few years where you'd kind of consolidate, and then it would go again. Well, that cycle essentially ended back in the early 90s. We haven't had a normal cycle. We've been through a 17-year liquidation phase here in the 2000s. And so where people have said, you know, we're a cyclical industry, we rely on a competitive market, we don't have government subsidies for price supports, and we have been liquidating cattle and adjusting our supplies based on the demand. Well, that's not occurring anymore.
Could I mention too, what Bill's talking about on these imports? Fat cattle to our shores from Brazil are about 70 cents a pound. That's why the imports are up. But Brazilian imports from January through March of 22 were up 356%. And we've got charts on that we gave a presentation on. So to displace you with imports is easily done.
But don't you think this has all been by design?
Almost
Indeed.
definitely.
You know,
So
I look at it and I'm small cow calf. You know, the majority that I raise is family consumption. I don't sell it unless somebody just, you know, they want to come up and buy one of my cows. But everything that I've read and I've researched, and I've been looking at the big land grabs that have been coming in from foreign governments have bought US property. Bill Gates has bought hundreds of thousands of acreage. So with the foreign imports that are on the increase and the cow calf producers on the decrease, you know, this is something in my mind. I'm not the sharpest tool in the shed by any means, but it seems like this has been taking place through the years by a design to where the American cattle industry is not going to go by the wayside. But it will be under more government control. And me personally, I don't buy beef in the store anymore because I have my own. I want American beef. I have been down to Brazil, Argentina, Honduras. I've seen the conditions of these animals. Brazilian animals, nothing but antibiotics and steroids because they want to pack them up and they send them up here. I don't want my kids eating that. So, and to me, when we send people to Washington, D.C., they may go with good intentions, but they're just like everybody else. They get caught into the loop, and with the packers, with any kind of other lobbyist, and they're bought off. And that's just, you know, my opinion of it. I'm sick and tired of seeing what I have. Anytime I go to the grocery store, I take a look at the beef, and I'm looking to see how much is going per pound. It is ridiculous. And the American people, because they're hungry, will pay it. They don't know whether or not if it's American. All they see is a label, USDA. And I can guarantee you that the majority of the beef that is coming into this country, they're not inspecting it. They're running it through. I doubt if the carcasses are being inspected. But when the Americans are sending their beef to the packers, I'd be willing to bet that every carcass that they have is being inspected. So we talk about a level playing field. It's going to take a lot more then some legislation. And I think the legislation's good, but I think it's going to take a lot more push and to hold people accountable in Washington, D.C., and also within our state governments. That's my 2 cents.
No,
So
go ahead.
I'd like to build on that if I could. So I building off what Jim said, I don't know where to start this, but I think this is a really important component. So I think we do, I've been holding back a little bit, but I really do think we need to be pretty strategic. I'm not saying that we should hold up progress on this, but I think we need to get involved strategically. Just in the past year, I got involved with Farm Bureau, and I'm a delegate now for our county Farm Bureau, and now I've just been asked to go to DC and be a delegate for the state Farm Bureau here in Michigan because I was very active. I jumped right in, and I jumped in on relative issues to what we're talking about here. I proposed some language change in the Farm Bureau policy book as it relates to monopolies, to be more critical of imported meat products. And I was able to, one of 400 people, my first year, my first time being a delegate, I didn't even know what the procedure was. And I was able to effectively change 3 different policies, include language to be more critical. And so let me back up a second and just say, for anybody who doesn't know how it works, Farm Bureau creates a policy book that is for the counties, the state, and the national level. These policy books are what they want to see. So it's more of a statement of what they support and what they're against. The delegates get to change or finalize or put the polishing touches on these policies. And then this book, they arm Chuck, I lost the name again. What the people who go and
Lobbyists?
Lobbyists, yes. So they arm the lobbyists with these policy books, and I think a lot of our politicians are just ignorant. I don't think I don't think they're armed with enough information. But I think that if we utilize organizations like Farm Bureau and got more involved and integrated, and included some language that supported what we're doing here, then it would put that language in front of the politicians so that when a politician goes back to their office to consult their resource, they see this language supporting what we're doing from what they've determined or developed as their go-to source on some of these issues. And I think if we're more involved, it's more of a multi-pronged approach. And I think that in the future, moving forward, I'd like to work with Farm Bureau, not claiming that I don't have any kind of ties to them. I'm not, in love with what they're doing. But I think that if we went to them and said, how do we get more involved? I think outlining that procedure to our membership might help us if we have multiple states with people on our side advocating for these policy changes. It's not a quick process. It's not going to happen until next year. This year's policy book is almost put together.
And I don't disagree with you. I've spoken to many Farm Bureau local and state organizations. And then we find that we battle the national level, the American Farm Bureau Federation, on all these critical issues like country of origin labeling, like putting some control on these unlimited volume of imports coming into this country. And so this is why this group has gotten together, is in recognition of the fact that we're where we're at today while others have been at the wheel. And that includes, the American Farm Bureau Federation, the National Farmers Union, the National Cattlemen's Beef Association. They have all been influencing Congress, and they have all convinced Congress that what we need is more free trade agreements, no regulations on the packers. And I want to go back to what Jim said. Jim said that first, this is by design. He's absolutely right. The playbook was written in the poultry and hog industries. Now they're just tweaking it to modify it for the cattle industry. So no question about it. But the other thing Jim said was pretty soon we're going to be subject to strict government controls. Well, the reason we're here is because of strict corporate controls. We have corporate dominance that has effectively influenced the industry just as if it were the government doing it. And so we've got to regulate that behavior, or we will be controlled by somebody, either the government or continuing to be subject to the controls of the meat packers. And so that's, I think, an important distinction is our government, our industry is being controlled, the marketplace is being controlled because we've got multinational meat packers that have been massaging all of the policies affecting the industry and ensuring that no meaningful reforms are ever put in place. And they've been successful at that for 4 decades.
To be clear, I wasn't arguing that Farm Bureau is a better way to affect change. I think the path we're on is great. I just think that it would be beneficial to, in addition, encourage our members to get
Absolutely.
involved.
I agree.
I agree with that, Jay. I
as
agree
far-
with everything that you're saying.
And as far as your point about the National Farm Bureau, we just need to penetrate a little further to get to that level, because what I found, even at the state level, was that there were people that approached me with interest of the big packers in mind, and I was able to have a conversation with them about what we're advocating. What I'm advocating isn't what I was advocating there for the for language that was complementary to what we're doing here wasn't at odds with what their needs were.
Right.
But if we're able to get to the table and have the discussions and let them know that, it's complementary, it's not oppositional. And I think we can be effective if we keep push that message far enough.
Yeah, I'm personally very glad you're doing that. And we need more like you doing the same thing. And the process of education, I think, is important here, because what we've been thinking for the last several decades has not been working. We need to look at this differently. We need to look at it from the position of the producer. And that's what you're doing. So I think that's great.
Jay, I have a friend in Missouri. I went and spoke at the Stone County Farm Bureau meeting. Like Bill has said, we talked to a lot of Farm Bureau groups. That group actually donated money to the RCAF Association, which caused a big stink with National Farm Bureau. They give me a check for $4,700 after I got done. But we have a dairy guy there. There's a lot of small dairies, and they were involved with that. And this guy's name is Rick Squibb. He's the head of the beef side for Farm Bureau. And they were trying to get some proposals to come on board with our ideas, because they're losing ground in Missouri too, and losing producers, and they've lost about all their independent dairy people. And so it's become quite a quagmire. I mean, what the fear, I think, becomes, we talked about the money, we heard a little bit about the money and the control. Now, if you don't get aligned with these ideas of animal ID, traceability, the funding sources, which is controlled by basically Rabobank, they believe, is going to control your world, because you either get involved with them or you don't get funded. And that's another big fear that's going to be coming with people in agriculture production. I don't have to borrow money anymore, thank God. But, to those that do or wanting to start out, I had to borrow money when I started. I didn't have to deal with that. I didn't have to be a corporate guy to do that. And our ex-president with RCAF was George Chambers, and he went to the National Farm Bureau and they supported a M-Cool bill, and then National revoked it. So I'm with you. I mean, we've got friends that are involved, so hopefully you can do some good too.
Frankly, it's going to take all of us.
Yeah. And we can roll that out when we get the group set up. We can strategize a little bit. Chuck, Angie, and I were talking a little bit, and I think that next week, we'll probably talk a little bit more about it. But if we can get more and more state directors set up and the Facebook group set up, then we can kind of originate the message and distribute a more unified message and more of a plan and strategic approach to kind of hitting all of our representatives with the same language at the same time. And really, I think a small group of us can make a difference. And Farm Bureau claims to be a grassroots effort. So I think we can kind of lean on them a little bit. And not just Farm Bureau. I think there are other organizations too that we can get involved in and kind of and deploy the same strategy in order to really kind of penetrate get enough penetration to make a difference. And I think it'll be important to put some effort and find some members in our relative states to apply some pressure in these areas as well, while we're working on all of these other components.
Jay, we tried to, we talk about other groups. Several years ago, Bill would remember this. I put together a group to try to get 5 or 6 groups together to send one single message, unified, that we would support mandatory country of origin labeling. And some of them broke away, said, no, we don't want to use a unified voice. We want to write our own scripted message. And I said, what the problem is you go to a legislator, well, this group wants this, you want that, they want this, the other group wants that. We couldn't get anything unified, to tie it together as this is the direction we want to go. We all want to support mandatory country of origin labeling with all imports being labeled to the last consumer. A simple message. I don't know.
So I think we can take that lesson and we can respond to that with strategically, right? So I'm going to note what you just said, because I think that's important. And then perhaps when we do this, we can create that. I think Angie mentioned earlier, kind of a letter where we just kind of change some of the blanks. But in addition, we can create some bullet points to hit, so that if someone does take it upon themselves to kind of create their own language, we have a list of suggested bullet points that we would like them to nail in their messaging. So that I think we can apply that lesson in that way as we roll this out. Yeah, so I'm going to make some notes.
Jay, out of curiosity, did Angie share with you the platform, kind of the Angie? Does Jay have that? The introduction to the AMP Act?
I believe I sent it, but I've sent so much stuff lately that I'm not sure. So I'm happy to send it.
Please send that to him. Jay, that kind of has a preface like what we talked about today, an introduction. Why is all this necessary? And
Great.
you might find that helpful.
Hey, Bill, if you don't mind addressing the problem we're having when we call congressmen and representatives, senators, and we talk to their point ag guy or gal, and the first thing they say to us is, well, you don't have to tell us what's going on. We pretty much know, because we listen to Farm Bureau and NCBA and all that. Why is that happening all the time?
So what they hear over and over again from the lobbyists and I'm a lobbyist too. I'm the registered lobbyist for RCAP. So I go to Washington, D.C. and do the same and run into the very same thing. And what they've all heard was producers do not want the government involved in their industry. They do not want the government to be regulating how they can sell cattle, for example. And that argument has carried the day for decades. That's been the same argument. That's why the only solution that they've ever meaningfully put forward was we just need to enter the North American Free Trade Agreement, the US-Australian Free Trade Agreement. We just need to create more market availability, more market access for US producers. But that's been an abject failure. That has not moved the needle. It has accelerated the ongoing contraction of our industry. And so until and unless we can break them free of that, for lack of better words, the mantra that they use, and that is do not let the government get involved in our business. And that's why, for example, you've got the National Cattle and Beef Association and the American Farm Bureau are in agreement that they do not want to require the packers to purchase a certain volume in the marketplace, because they do not want to regulate the conduct of the packers. We're going to have to break through that mold somehow. And Jay, your work can begin to change that. But that's been the greatest obstacle that we've not been able to overcome. And many people, won't discuss these issues of, well, what about these formula contracts that have now been shown to be harmful to the independent producer? How do we address those? And we've got to get to that discussion, but we're not there yet. They're not willing to discuss that yet.
So I actually agree with that when you summarize it as a sentence, that I don't want the government getting involved in what I'm doing as a producer. I agree with that statement. So what if we embrace that and address that in the language? I mean, I'm not trying to go back and reinvent the wheel or anything, but I'm saying, what if we embrace that, or we create language that limits that somehow in what it is we're putting forward?
Right. Yeah, and so we do that and have done that, but by way of saying, what we're asking for are just reforms to the structure of the market. We're not trying to regulate producers. We're regulating the conduct that has been identified as interfering with competitive market forces. Our single highest priority is to restore competition. But it's a difficult process. It's why politics is politics.
Right.
Jay, I think what Bill's saying is that just like MCOOL, they say, well, we don't want government involvement in our business. But we have to utilize the government to get sometimes to point A to point B. The NCBA, for example, they use the government with the beef checkoff to manage our money. And we don't like that, or I don't support the beef checkoff the way it is currently. I've always been a promoter of business as usual, but if it doesn't work and it's working against me, I'm highly opposed to it. But those guys, it's hard to have it both ways, but we need to have a regulatory agency to help us as independent people. It's like going to court. We're accused a lot of times that we're too court ridden. We file lawsuits to do that, because then you put the weakest guy against the most powerful guy, and with the judge and the jury, hopefully you can win or you can lose. And we've watched that both ways. So to legislate or to litigate is the issue. At times, I would like to see us be able to legislate to get something done, but you'll always hear, well, if you do that, there's going to be unintended consequences. Well, remember this word. What they have done, they were intentional consequences. They knew exactly what they were doing.
So I agree with the purpose of what it is we're doing, but my ignorance to how the industry works, or some of the components that you talked about today, Bill, paired with my constitutionally conservative position, might lead to healthy conversation in how to problem solve and pull these people along who are opposed to the excessive regulation that this might introduce, or their perception of some excessive regulation. But I think that's an obstacle that we can't just say, well, I'm not saying any of you said it's not valid. I'm just saying that we can't just ignore it like it's not valid. We're going to have to address it, I think, in order to gain more broader acceptance of what we're doing and support for the direction that we're headed. And I'd like to, if nobody has a response to that, I'd like to mention something complimentary. So I think, again, I feel almost guilty mentioning Farm Bureau so much, but Farm Bureau just decided that they're going to put together Farm Bureau public policy committees. And the goal is for them basically to build and maintain relationships with their elected officials in their local, state, and national level. And I think now might be a really good time for us, at least as we grow as a group, to reach out to Farm Bureau, get involved, and maybe get on that. We're already talking about, I think that's where the conversation is going, that we need to build relationships with our local representatives and kind of be that bug in their ear, be their contact, and engage with them. And I think through Farm Bureau is asking for the same thing. So we could pirate this effort on Farm Bureau's part by reaching out to Farm Bureau saying, hey, I hear you want to do this. I want to be on this committee. I want to be a Farm Bureau member. And kind of do double duty here, pull some double duty, getting involved. And I mean, since we're going to be doing these things anyways, it might be a good time to get involved. And I think that being on these committees and getting involved is what has helped in my county, at least push me up, and have them push me out there to represent them because I'm a little more outspoken. So if you guys want, I can get with Chuck on how to distribute this information about this committee so that the language, you know what language to mention. And if you guys think it's a good idea, embrace it. But I'm happy to share that information if that's something you guys think is a good idea.
Bill, thank you, Jay. Bill, I'm just curious, while we're talking about Farm Bureau and NCBA and there's several questions I have. The AMAs, explain that if you would, the sweetheart deals. And then I want to come back to what Jay was talking about Farm Bureau and NCBA, because I would kind of like to know your thoughts on where they are with playing both sides of the fence. And I don't know if Farm Bureau does it. We've discussed NCBA before, but first, if you don't mind, the sweetheart deals and how they work, is that part of the formula contract?
So AMAs, or alternative marketing arrangements, are any means of procuring cattle other than the competitive cash market. So AMAs do include formula contracts. They include forward contracts. So forward contracts, as distinguished from formula, forward contracts are based on the futures market, whereas formula contracts, as we talked about, are tied to the residual market. So those are two examples of AMAs. So if we're talking the same thing. All of them can be classified as captive supplies, where the packer has cattle committed to them without them contributing to price discovery in the cash market. So AMAs include all of that. What was the second part of the question?
How Farm Bureau and NCBA, do they play both sides of the fence? I mean, I know NCBA, they're handling the checkoff dollars and they've got different people that sit on different boards. Does Farm Bureau do the same thing? Or are they both sort of alike or what?
Well, so I'm most familiar with the National Cattlemen's Beef Association. And I know, for example, that back in the mid-90s, they changed from being a producer exclusive organization to where they invited the packers in. They merged with the packers in 1996. So the NCBA has both producers and packers seated on their governing board. We view that to be a conflict because on the one hand, you've got cattle producers who want to maximize their returns. You've got packers who want to maximize their returns, and they're in conflict. It's a natural conflict that we call competition, and we think that they're in a very difficult spot. However, as the policies become more visible to producers, and they recognize that, for example, the NCBA's opposition to mandatory country of origin labeling is harmful to their interests, they begin putting a lot of pressure on the NCBA, and the NCBA has modified their policies as a result of the grassroots members' pressure upon them, which has moved them, it moved the needle, but not caused them to support what we're doing. And we truly believe that our industry is in a crisis today, and we have to make some meaningful changes to the marketplace. And so, and we recognize that we stand in opposition to them on some of these reforms, which is difficult. And we recognize that they're well respected in Washington, D.C., but they've not taken any meaningful steps to reform the marketplace. And so our industry continues to decline. With all the indices, of economic vitality, we see, as we talked about earlier, all these downward trajectories. So that's why my group was formed. We were formed 20 some years ago, right after the NCBA merged with the meat packers, because the members who formed RCAP, many of them were members of the NCBA, and said, once they merge with the packers, we've lost our exclusive voice as producers. And now we can't do anything in Washington that isn't compromised before we get there, because we have to have an agreement amongst those on the board. And so that's, from our view, it's problematic.
Joshua, are you available there? Could you describe, Joshua, a little bit about NCBA and the groups and the cattle organizations and how they kind of funnel money upward in the chain, up, I think all the way up to what, the Roundtable for Sustainable Beef and that sort of thing?
Yeah, so back to that, everything's by design. If you haven't heard of the Global Roundtable for Sustainable Beef or its sister organization, the U.S. Roundtable for Sustainable Beef, that's where some of this is coming in too. Their whole goal, they're a globalist organization. It's all tied to the UN and tied into with the UN Agenda 21, which the goal for that is that there's going to be large plots of acreage that are going to be conservation acres that nobody will live on, that nobody will produce any kind of agriculture on those plots of land. And so everything that you're seeing is to concentrate everything down, concentrate us into areas that we're allowed to live. I don't know how much everybody's kind of looked into that or not, but everything's tied to that. The land grabs, the concentration of the meat industry. The Global Roundtable for Sustainable Beef is a non-governmental organization that's setting policies for us as producers. And they help to set those policies, whether that be in DC or just policies that are adopted by the industry and self-regulated. RFID tags, mandatory RFID in our cattle. That is a policy that's straight from the GRSB. And so every part of that is, and if you look at the governing board, everything can be found on their website. But you look at the governing board of the GRSB, it includes the National Cattlemen's Beef Association. It includes your packers. They have a seat at that board as well. You also have quite literally environmentalist organizations that are out to destroy our industry. If you haven't heard of Jason Clay, I highly recommend that you go and listen to Jason Clay on YouTube and then see what you think, because his agenda is exactly what's driving everything. And but really part of that too is your National Cattlemen's Beef Association. If you don't support them, your state, they have state organizations. Here in Oklahoma, it's the Oklahoma Cattlemen's Association. Texas, it's Texas Southwestern Cattle Raisers Association. as well as the Texas Cattle Feeders Association. Both of them are affiliates with the NCBA. And every dollar that is collected within those state organizations within dues goes to the national, or part of that goes to the National Cattlemen's Beef Association. And if you ever hear their numbers of these organizations, of how many members they have, they include not just the membership that they have in their actual organization, they include the membership in their state organizations as well. And so it's kind of a big tangled mess that can be kind of hard to pick out. Tracy Hunt, if you guys aren't familiar with him, you can go to the RCAF YouTube channel and see some of his speeches from past conventions. And I highly recommend that you listen to those. I hope that answered what you're wanting me to, Chuck.
Yeah, thank you, Josh. Well, y'all all see the challenges we face because there's really so much to this, and it's kind of the reason we got involved over a year ago to try to make some changes. It amazes me that I go into a feed store or a tire shop or somewhere and I see these day workers and cowboys with a 28-foot livestock trailer and 4 dogs and 2 horses and a cowboy hat and spurs, and you start talking to them about beef and where's it come from and what's going on, and they don't, their eyes glaze over. They have no idea what's going on. And when you tell them, hey man, if you don't educate yourself and figure all this out in 3 years, you're not going to have a job. And they go, ha, yeah, we'll see, buddy. But I've said this many times before, my prediction and what I know. I mean, I'm just a facilitator, and I learn something new every time I listen to these gentlemen. But I predict that if we don't make changes within the next 3 years, America is going to be buying only imported beef, and our beef is going to be exported to the highest bidder overseas, and we're going to have manipulation of the supply chain, bare shelves, and that kind of thing. And I think it's coming. I think it's a perfect storm because we've got the drought involved. We've got the war in Ukraine. They can't export grains. We're going to have to feed the world. We're not going to be able to do it. We're going to have very few beef producers producing for the packers. The beef industry is going to become chickenized, and we're going to be sending our beef overseas. So that's what we're here for. We're trying to make that change, and we appreciate everybody being on the call and everybody expressing interest in working with us. And hopefully we'll have the AMP Act out by the end of the year. We want to put a bow on it and do a Merry Christmas to beef producers and consumers from the TAPS group with a bow on the AMP Act. So hopefully we can do that. Anybody else have any questions, or this has been a great call?
I have something real quick. Just while we're on the call, because we discussed it so much, I would like, I'd like to revisit in one of the groups. I'd like to put out there a request to you guys and to the other members of what organizations we may want to include in a list of people of organizations we want our members to get involved in. So perhaps, you know, Farm Bureau, I'm very limited, right? So I'm fairly new. I'm a first generation farmer. So maybe Farm Bureau isn't perfect. I think it's going to be effective for me, but I think that I'd like for you guys to include, you guys being more knowledgeable about the industry and about these programs. Joshua mentioned, you know, that there were other organizations to get involved in. So perhaps we should come up with a list that we recommend our members getting involved with, so that then when we distribute some of this information, it kind of penetrates into those organizations as well. And maybe you guys are aware of the organizations that might be more effective to participate in. And I just wanted to mention that now, so when you guys see it in the group, you know the context of what we're looking for.
Okay, to a great extent, the TAPS group is kind of that central clearinghouse because they've invited other groups, to be a part of this. And providing, an educational forum that isn't otherwise available to some of these other groups. So I know they've invited me as a representative of RCAF, for example, and you as a representative from your state's Farm Bureau organization, but we've also talked to Protect the Harvest. Chuck, maybe, and Angie, you could help me, some of the other groups that you've talked to, but they've invited everybody onto this forum for that very purpose. To share and to strategize and to develop what is needed to address the critical nature of this, the crisis that the cattle producers are facing today. Because
Bill, did we
Chuck,
have consumer groups involved too? Chuck, Angie? The consumer groups?
We're working on that, Mike. We have, in fact, you were working on that for us. Remember, you have the gentleman that that is over the meat department of a grocery chain.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, Frankie
Those
Greco,
type-
yeah.
Yeah.
With him.
Yeah.
Jay, I wanted to say
that-
to you is we've got some friends, all of us have some friends in Farm Bureau, and you guys should work together too. I mean, I think it would be important because we got friends in Georgia, Missouri. I mean, you guys might be able to make a little bit of an alliance with each other to try to push that deeper.
So
You know what I mean?
I'm a little bit more of I love strategizing. So my goal, my vision is that that's what we'll do at some point. We'll have a bunch of our members that are in these different groups and kind of unify the message a little bit. So I agree with that. And I think as we grow, that will be beneficial. And I would love to make that connection.
Can we get your information, Chuck? Can we get Jay's information and everybody's that's involved that,
Sure.
and what affiliation you might have? Because we could share that amongst the group here, probably.
So what I was getting at,
Certainly.
you guys mentioned an organization earlier though, and I went to their website and it was, the language on their website was deceiving, right? So it was an organization that you guys were critical of. But I did, Joshua mentioned it, I think, and I went to their website and sure enough, they had the Packers listed and as board members and stuff. So anyways, somebody else who's not as knowledgeable or not putting much effort into figuring out what's going on might think that getting involved in one of those organizations is complementary to what we're doing. And I'm just suggesting that we create a list of groups that we want members to get involved with so that our voice will be more effectively heard.
I think
that the
that's
Global
a
Roundtable
point well
website that
taken,
you went
Jay.
to.
Yes.
Jim, go ahead. You had something to say?
Yeah, Jay, that's a point well taken. We want to make sure that the members that we do have joining our group, if they're going to join other groups as well, that they're complementary to what we're trying to do. That's a
Yes.
good point.
And look out for that. I think we'll try to, Chuck and I'll strategize this week and see if we can, if that's one of the things we can get out there within the next 2 weeks into the Facebook groups.
Sounds good. Any other questions or comments? We're looking forward to getting the AMPAC out and hopefully we can, again, everybody that's involved as a state administrator, please keep in mind that what we want to do is get in contact with any of your elected officials. And we'll be happy to do a Zoom call, not a Zoom call to start with, but a conference call with your elected officials, talk to your ag person, try to get a Zoom call set up. But that's the first move. So, any other questions or comments?
This is Chris.
Yeah, hey,
and-
Chris.
Just wanted to say this has been a very informative meeting. There's a lot of good questions here. And Miss Angie said that in the beginning, it's all about networking. And then Mr. Bill, like he said, people's been conditioned to go with the flow and getting them to actually see what's going on. Just like you, Chuck, most of the people I talk to have no idea, and I was in the same boat not too terribly long ago. So it's just a matter of getting the information out there the best we can. And a lot of that involves legwork, not just social media, because a lot of like a lot of my friends are not on social media, my older cattle people. So you got to put something in their hand and let them read it and let them study it, then talk to them about it.
Yeah, I've always said that, from the beginning, I've said the only way we're gonna get this to work is to get the consumer behind us. The problem we're facing and fighting is that less than 1% of the people in the United States produce all the food that everybody else eats. And part of that percentage of the producers don't even know what's going on. So we've got to educate the consumer. I mean, for this to work, at some point in the near future, and I say near future, within the next year, the AMP Act needs to be a kitchen table name. It needs to be introduced, and people need to be educated enough to know that they're getting stuff from overseas that they shouldn't really even be consuming, and they should be up in arms about that. But I'm not sure how to make it happen except to continue what we're doing right now. I mean, we're all going to have to be involved, and we're going to have to get, like Angie said, networking to me is paramount. Everybody knows somebody who knows somebody who knows somebody, and we've got to get it out to everybody. Like, hey, if you want to keep eating this crud that's coming in from overseas because the USDA wants to slap a product of America label on it, or do you want to know where your beef comes from, and do you want a level playing field from the big corporate giants? I mean, it's pretty simple to get out there. They don't have to be able to recite the AMP Act, but they need to know some basic principles. And we're going to have to educate a lot of folks.
Yes, sir. When I left some of the handouts we printed out the other day that y'all sent on email, I made sure to stay there a few minutes and educate the people that was actually gonna try to make sure people got a copy of it so they know what they were giving out.
Jay, you also, rest of you guys understand that beef is one of the few items that isn't labeled.
Oh yeah, yeah. You know, you go to the grocery store and you find shrimp that's a product of Thailand, or tilapia of Thailand, cashews, where they're from. Beef is the only thing that's really not labeled. I go to the store and buy shrimp, and I always pick Gulf shrimp because I know it's from the Gulf of Mexico. But when I go to the grocery store and look for beef, I've done a couple of videos in the grocery store about beef and pointed to the label, and there's no label. A lot of them, there's just no label at all. It doesn't say where it comes from. So, yeah.
Well, my phone's about to die and I still have to go feed and water today. So 2 properties.
We got work to do. Everybody's
Nice to meet
gotta
you,
go
Jay.
work.
Nice to meet
Thank
you
you.
guys.
Thank everybody for being on the call today. We'll have another call next Tuesday. And hey, Bill, anytime you want to join us, Mike, we sure appreciate it. Joshua, everybody, all the experts, man, I'll tell you what, we couldn't do it without you. So thank y'all very much. Y'all have a
Thank you,
Merry
everybody.
Christmas.
Thank you, everyone. Have a Merry Christmas.
Same to
Merry
you.
Christmas
Bye.
to you.